G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today we are talking with founding member and organist of Fraternity, John Bisset. Fraternity are best known as being the band Bon Scott was lead vocalist of before his AC/DC days. John became a founding member of Fraternity after he and other members of Levi Smiths Clefs left the Clefs in 1970. Bon Scott would join Fraternity in early 1971 and is featured on lead vocals, along with John on organ, on both of the band's albums, Livestock and Flaming Galah. John left Fraternity in 1973 while the band were undertaking a disastrous trip to the UK. Since then, John has remained in music here and there throughout the years, and today has made the time to be on the show to talk about his time in Fraternity and his musical journey. G'day John, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
G'day Jack, yeah, it's good to hear from you.
Good to hear from you too, John. And look, I just wanted to start off in the beginning. You're born in New Zealand in 1947, spending most of your time in Cambridge, New Zealand, I've read. What can you tell me about your childhood growing up?
First memories were on a dairy farm near Cambridge, and then we moved into town and Dad became a shopkeeper. So most of my young years were in Cambridge, and then when I left school, I moved to Hamilton, where I am now. My mother was very encouraging of any kind of creativity. We used to go to summer holidays out at Raglan, which is about an hour's drive from Hamilton. We used to stay in Raglan in a tent in the camping ground for a couple of weeks. That's where this guy was entertaining my sister and her friends. He was playing the guitar and singing Bye Bye Love and songs like that. And he was so popular because he played guitar that, I guess that's when I thought, hey, that's a good gig sort of thing, I had friends came around who played guitar, and I had a Maori friend called Sam who played drums. When I was still at high school, we formed a little band, and we used to enter into Talent Quest. I think we came second or third a couple of times. Yeah, we were called the Shadracks. We had a singer called Dave Armstrong for a while. Gary Wright was playing bass. I think Gary was playing bass, and Robin Hutchins, probably my longest childhood friend, he played rhythm guitar and I played lead guitar. Sometimes we didn't have a drummer, but when we did have a drummer, it was usually Sam Clark. Yeah, we did one or two gigs outside of Talent Quest as well. I think we played at a rugby club and we played at a 21st party or something like that.
After the Shadracks, you joined a band called the Mods, and of course by this time the Beatles are happening all over the world and especially in New Zealand. I mean, yeah, take me through how you got from the Shadracks to the Mods.
I first heard the Beatles in a milk bar in Cambridge, and like all the young people in those days, I was absolutely blown away by the Beatles. After I left school in 1963, it was my last year at school, and in 1964, I got a job in Hamilton, so I used to commute to Hamilton. I was looking for a band to play with, and I was in a music shop in Hamilton, and the bass guitarist of one of the other bands around Hamilton, possibly the Fenders, I'm not sure who he played for, but he told me that the Mods were looking for a rhythm guitarist. So I kind of stopped playing lead guitar at that time and switched to rhythm guitar, which was a lot easier. And then, of course, we went to see the movie Hard Day's Night. That was on in Hamilton. It was like a screaming contest. It was, the theatre was packed, and all the girls were just screaming. It was strange times. I've never seen anything quite like it. The Mods were sort of fizzling out about 66, and we were starting to sort of come adrift. And I got offered a job with an Auckland band called The Action. And I moved up to Auckland and got day jobs in Auckland to keep the money coming in.
I mean, you mentioned The Action. I mean, of course, that's when you started playing the keyboard. And I was kind of thinking, what inspired you to change from like rhythm guitar to keyboard for The Action? Yeah.
Sort of the writing was on the wall for rhythm guitarists. They were going out of fashion at that time. Looking back, I probably should have stayed with guitar, but our bass player in The Action, Jack Stradwick, he was keen to be in a band with keyboards, and he was there was a possibility he was going to leave. So I sort of put my hand up and said, I'll play keyboards, and I didn't really have a clue. I traded in my Gretsch guitar for a Jensen keyboard, and in the early gigs with the keyboard, I had pictures of all the chords in front of me on the organ, and I got through that way. But I've never been a great keyboard player, but I could play. I was more of a right-hand sort of player. I didn't do much with my left hand, so I wasn't much good on piano. I was just playing in bands. It was surprising how well accepted I was as a keyboard player in those days, because a lot of the keyboard players were pianists, but the pianists, because they had never been guitarists, they had a different approach to me. And because I was primarily a guitarist, I sort of knew what the guitar players wanted, if you know what I mean.
After you joined the Action in 1967, you guys decide to move to Sydney, Australia. What inspired that move, from New Zealand to Australia,
just ambition. Everybody was trying to move onward and upward into bigger and better gigs, and Australia seemed like an exciting place to go, where there'd be lots of music and lots of gigs as a band, and it was just ambition, really. We were all wanted to be rock stars, I suppose,
Yeah, and of course, when you got to Australia, I've read that you got a residency at the Hawaiian Eye nightclub. Am I right on that?
Not immediately. We did a few gigs around Sydney. I think we played at a university once, and we did a few gigs around the university. But we had a manager in Australia. We were paying a percentage to this manager dude. I can't remember his name, but I think it was him probably that got us a gig at the Hawaiian Eye. And that was, I think, 6 nights a week. It was regular work, and we weren't making a lot of money, but, we could survive, and we could pay our rent and that, It was a fairly small nightclub, as I remember. We, the Action, we did a lot. Our repertoire was mostly American soul music, and Tamla Motown. We did quite a bit of Tamla Motown. The big thing in that time in Sydney in 67, 68 was the Vietnam War, and the Americans used to come and talk to us in the nightclubs. In fact, one of them loaned me some money to buy a Leslie speaker cabinet for my organ. So he was a very generous sort of guy, and I think it was a couple of $100. It seemed like a lot at the time, but I got his address in America and sent money back to him.
One night, when you turned up for a gig with the Action, you turned up to the gig and you were told, I think, by the manager of the place you were playing that the band didn't exist anymore. Am I right on that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly how it happened. I turned up to play one night, and there had been all these personnel changes and people coming over from Auckland to play in the Action. I just turned up. The thing was falling apart, but it was all I had. It was the only gig I had, so I kept turning up. And I turned up one night, and sure enough, the band had packed it in.
As soon as you left the Action, the organist in the Clefs also left, and of course you got to join them. After their organists left. I think that's an amazing just occurrence that just happened to happen at the same time. Yeah.
It did. Their organist. While we were working at the Hawaiian Eye, the Whiskey A Go Go nightclub was owned by the same people, and I used to go to the Whiskey. It stayed open later than the Hawaiian Eye, so I used to go there after I'd finished at the Hawaiian Eye. I'd go to the Whiskey A Go Go, and they let me get up and have a jam on the organ. And then their organist left to form an acid rock band called Tully. And so there was a vacancy there, and I got a gig 6 nights a week at the Whiskey A Go Go with the Levi Smiths Clefs. I was sort of swinging from vine to vine. I'd run out of vines. I'd run out of vines to swing to, and suddenly there was a vine there.
You guys, as the Clefs, recorded an album in Adelaide, I think it was, called Empty Monkey. And I wanted to know, do you remember much about the recording of that album?
We sort of we developed a friendship with I can't remember their names, but there was this sort of manager guy and this songwriter, and we did some covers of his songs. I think they were somehow involved with us getting to do an album in Adelaide, and we sang a cover of one of this guy's songs. I just can't remember his name at the moment. Of all the recordings I did in those days, I'm most proud of that album. Actually, that's the Empty Monkey album. I was at my best that I played on the keyboards, and I had a fairly good sound with the Hammond. and I was in pretty good playing form because we'd been playing 6 nights a week sort of thing at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And so I was in pretty good form for playing. You know, looking back, I don't cringe at all listening to Empty Monkey, but some of the other stuff that we recorded in those years, I'm not so proud of. You know, I sort of don't play it much. You know,
I read you co-wrote a song on that album called Lisa. Do you remember much about the writing of that song? Yeah, Lisa. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a feeling. I think Mick Jerd had a hand in that, the guitarist of the Clefs. I'm not sure. I think it was a collaboration, but I wrote the lyrics and probably contributed to the melody in that as well. And they were just, I guess I was thinking of a female who had given me a particularly hard time, and I knew a few of them over the years.
With the Empty Monkey album, did it take long to record, or did you guys just do it in one session, or like how'd you go about that? Yeah.
No, I think there were 2 sessions at least, because there was another album which was the first practice session, and Barry McCaskill, the singer of the Clefs, sent me a copy of that other album, and it was the day before, I think, that we recorded the album. We had done a rehearsal for the whole album, and they were quite different, some of the tracks. It's really interesting. I don't know if we even knew it was being recorded, but they recorded the practice album first. Just a few years ago, Barry sent me a copy of it, and I was quite blown away. It's amazing.
Soon after that album, you guys decided to form another band without Barry. I mean, what inspired that decision? Yeah.
At the Whiskey A Go-Go, Barry was the sort of the leader in a big way, because he was the one that did the business with the nightclub. And he was the one that communicated with the bosses, the people who were running the Whiskey A Go-Go. And we did a gig on a yacht in Sydney Harbour once, for the people who owned the Whiskey A Go-Go. They had a party on a yacht, and the Clefs played on the yacht. And Barry sort of had all the connections, and we were his band, if you like, We sort of rebelled against Barry, I suppose, and thought, well, we don't really want to be somebody's backing band. We want to be control our own destiny, That's what caused it. It was an ambition once again, I think. It was just an ambition to be our own bosses,
After you formed that band without Barry, you guys moved back to Sydney. When did you become known as Fraternity? When did that kind of come about? Yeah.
I think we sort of we had a discussion, and people came up with different names. I can't remember any of the alternatives, but I'm pretty sure it was Mick Jerd that favoured Fraternity. And Mick was the senior man in the band. Mick was a few years older than the rest of us, and he was a highly accomplished musician. He was a highly respected guitar player around Australia, and I'm pretty sure it was Mick that came up with Fraternity, and it seemed like a fairly good name, so we all went along with it. We didn't have the image of fraternity like the American universities, where the fraternities where they have fraternities. It was more of an offspring of the hippie sort of movement, I think. It was more that kind of a mindset, if you know what I mean.
I've read too, you guys recorded your first single, Why Did It Have to Be Me, in October 1970, and
I think it was Jimmy Stewart that suggested we do a cover of a Moody Blues song, because the British records weren't being released in Australia. There was a sort of a strike thing going on, and they thought that if we did a cover version of a Moody Blues song, we might have a hit with it, but it didn't go anywhere. It was a question.
With that first A-side, the first single, Why Did It Have to Be Me? I mean, what did you think of the song when you kind of heard it for the first time? I mean, I'm assuming they presented it to you before they got you to record it and all that, yeah.
Doug Ashdown was a kind of an Australian Bob Dylan type person, And I had a lot of respect for him and his songwriting, and, I thought it was a very clever song, and good, clever lyrics, and quite sort of almost a bit of a sense of humour in there.
Yeah. I mean, would you say that it was a different experience recording as Fraternity than it was as the Clefs, like for the first time? I mean, like, did it feel different, or yeah? Yeah.
In my opinion, the Fraternity never really settled on a style, you know. We never really sat down and said, now, what kind of band are we? What's our direction? What are we going to do? You know, bands who did that tended to do a lot better. It's like AC/DC. They found what worked and they stuck to the knitting. You know.
Yeah.
They found what worked for them and they stuck to it. We sort of never really did that in fraternity, and that was the problem. We never really identified ourselves as what kind of band we were. And the nearest we came was we did a lot of covers of the band called The Band. In modern parlance, we were almost a band cover band, you know.
Early 1971, Bon Scott joins the band. Do you remember what month he joined the band? Like, does that memory stay with you at all? Yeah, in 1971, yeah.
I remember where we were living. The rest of the band were living in a terrace house, about four of them, I think it was. And me and my wife, we were separate from them. We had a child and a dog, so we tended to have to not live with the band. Cheryl and I, we had a flat about quarter of an hour's walk from where the rest of the guys were. It was presented to me as I had never been consulted about getting a singer. It just came out of the blue to me, but it was Bruce Howe, the bass player, who knew Bon. We had done several gigs in Melbourne we were on the same bill as Bon's band, the Valentine's Fraternity. We were on the same. Or it could have been the Clefs actually. And I think Bruce was a very gregarious sort of person. He probably got talking to Bon in those days, you know, and they became friends. Bon wanted to get into a more serious band, is the way it was presented to me. That Bon was looking that because the Valentines were never taken very seriously musically; they were more of a sort of a pop band. Whereas Fraternity were more intense and more kind of experimental. We're more cutting edge rock band, you know.
Yeah,
and Bon wanted to be a part of that. I think that's why he came into the band. Me and Bruce, the bass player, had been doing all the singing before Bon. So when Bon came on board, I took quite a big step back on stage performance. You know, I became a backing singer instead of a lead singer, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
but I didn't resent him for it because he had such a powerful voice. I was pleased that he was on our side, if you know what I mean.
I've read that the first song you heard him sing was the Vanilla Fudge classic, Take Me for a Little While. I mean, do you remember that moment, hearing him sing for the first time? Yeah,
that's the first time I realised, because I used to sing that. And when Bon sang it, he was on a different dimension to me as a singer. I don't know how it was, but he projected his voice a lot better. And I don't know if he had singing lessons or whatever, so I was happy to step back and just become more of a backing singer, you know. Bruce and I carried on singing one or two songs. We used to sing Chest Fever, which was one of our favourite songs. That was a band song that had a big organ introduction. I remember the first time we played in Melbourne with Bon. Well, Bon had a huge fan base in Melbourne from his days in the Valentines. And, of course, they all wanted to see what he was doing with his new band. And we played at this nightclub called Bertie's, where we had to hump the organ downstairs at Bertie's. I think we opened with Chest Fever, and I'm not sure. And I did the best organ solo I've ever done that night. And the crowd was just packed. There were people. There was a stairway going up to the next level, and the stairs were just covered in people sitting down watching. All of Bon Scott's Melbourne fan base were there listening to me doing the Chest Fever introduction, and it was a very exciting moment to blow people away with an organ solo. And then Bruce and I did the singing for that. And I think Bon just played tambourine in that one. But then, of course, Bon sang the rest of the songs of the night. But In my whole music career, that night at Bertie's, when Bond first appeared in front of the Melbourne audience, that was the best night of my life, playing in a band. We possibly had, there was another nightclub which we might have done before Bertie's, I'm not sure. I can't remember where. I think Bertie's was the last gig of the night. As I said before, in Melbourne you tended to do about 3 gigs a night. And I think we had done 2 gigs when we went to Bertie's was the 3rd gig. Sebastian's, that was the other one, Sebastian's. We played at Sebastian's before Bertie's, but that was the gig at Bertie's is the one that was amazing, stands out in my memory.
Soon after Bond joined, you guys signed with a guy called Hamish Henry, and you moved to a large property in the Adelaide Hills, I think it was. Take me through that, yeah.
When Hamish Henry became our manager, I remember, the rest of the guys moved to this house up in the Adelaide Hills with a property, about a 5-acre property, I think it was. Trees, and it had a little pond. And Cheryl and I were relegated to a small cottage out in the suburbs, and it was pretty bleak. We suffered there, I don't know how long, a few months, and then Hamish very kindly moved us into his art studio in right near the city of Adelaide. He had an art studio. I can't remember the name of the street. I used to go out to the property in the Adelaide Hills quite often for rehearsals and things like that.
I think it was around that same time you guys started recording the Livestock album. Was that recorded in Adelaide?
I think it was done mostly in Sydney.
Yeah, okay, yep.
They have memories of it in Sydney. Some of the tracks on it, you'll notice, where Bruce and I were singing, and they were probably recorded before Bond joined the band, and then some of them had Bond singing. So
did you guys start recording live, like the album Livestock as a whole, before Bond joined?
Yeah, I think we did. And Bond came along while we were recording that album, and he put in his vocals on, I don't know what percentage of the songs, but some of the songs were just me and Bruce. I think I've never sat down and counted them or anything like that, but I know that some of the songs Bruce and I sang and some of the songs Bond sang.
When you were doing Livestock, how did they record your organ? Did they plug it straight into the recording desk to record, or did they have an amp of some type and mic that up? How did they go about that?
I didn't always have a Leslie, but when I had a Leslie speaker cabinet, I think they just put 2 microphones on the Leslie. The Leslies have a top horn that rotates, and they have a rotating baffle for the bass down the bottom. And they would have had just 2 microphones on the Leslie cabinet.
Yeah, is that the organ you're using for the Livestock album?
I can't say for sure. I think I had most often. It wasn't until later on in Fraternity when I switched to. Later on in Fraternity, I switched away from a Hammond organ and had a Lowry organ. That was partly because that's what the band used, so it had to sound like the band. And I went away from having a proper Leslie to one made by Strauss, the amplifier people in Melbourne. It wasn't very good. So my organ sound in Fraternity deteriorated over the years. I had a better sound in the early days, and I've gone Empty Monkey with the Clefs. I had a Hammond organ and a Leslie. Later on in Fraternity, I had no Hammond and no Leslie, so it got worse. Partly because in those days I just went with the flow all the time, and I didn't stick up for myself and say, "Hey, I want a Leslie," or "Hey, I want a Hammond." The other guys like Sam C, the guitarist we took on later on. So we had 2 guitarists. He was sort of stick up for himself and tell Hamish, the manager, what he wanted, what he needed, and stuff like that. And I was sort of very Mickey. I don't know. Just didn't know what I wanted, It wasn't clear.
I know you co-wrote some songs with Mick Jard on the album Livestock. I think you wrote the Livestock song, and you wrote Cool Spot with him. What was your writing process with Mick?
There was nothing formal, but generally speaking, I was more of a lyric person, I think. Mick was more of a musical, more the chord person, if you like. But having said that, there was probably some overlap in both directions. You know, Mick probably made some lyric suggestions, and I probably made some chord suggestions. But it was just mainly Mick sitting around with a guitar in a hotel room, sort of thing. You know.
When you guys did record, you know, like your albums like Livestock and Flaming Galah, I mean, did you guys experiment a lot in the studio, or like did you have overdubs, or did you just play it live? Like, how'd you go about that? Yeah.
All I can remember is that we did it very quickly. Yeah, particularly with the second album, Flaming Galah. I think that was recorded mostly in Melbourne, and I have very hardly any memory of it at all. So it must have been very quick. I think we basically just songs that we were playing regularly, we just went in and did them more or less live.
I mean, Flaming Galah, you guys, on that album, I was interested, like, I read this, and, I mean, 5 of the 10 tracks, I think it is, are re-recordings of songs you guys already did previously. I mean, what inspired you guys to do so many re-recordings on Flaming Galah, yeah?
I don't know for sure, but I'd say it was mainly because we weren't writing enough songs, you know? We were trying to be too clever, you know?
Yeah.
We were trying to be too complicated, and we couldn't just write simple blues rock songs, you know. The other guys, they learnt the lesson that I learnt too, and Bruce Howe, who was the driving force in Fraternity, if we didn't really have an official leader, but if Bruce was if anyone was a leader, it was Bruce. He and the harmonica player Uncle and a couple of other guys formed a blues rock band, you know, in the 80s and 90s, the 70s, 80s and 90s. And they were doing gigs around Australia as Mickey Finn, they called themselves. And they had gone back to the blues, you know, blues rock. A pity Fraternity never had that we hadn't sort of realized we weren't taking our audience into account enough. When you're playing in front of an audience, you have to think of the audience when you're writing your original songs. You have to write songs that are right for performance. And when you're performing in a pub, you don't want Raglan's Folly, you know. When you're performing in a pub, you want songs about just simple blues rock songs about falling in love and falling out of love and just simple blues and rock songs, and that's all they want in the pubs. You know, Fraternity, if we had a bit of that sort of vibe, but if we had really dropped all of this complicated stuff and stuck with the simple stuff and written some simple songs, we would have done a lot better.
I did some reading, and I think I'm quoting here, I think on your website you mentioned, or maybe it might be an interview you did a few years ago, you say, the stage band rocked, it had to rock to survive, but in the studio we didn't rock. And I mean, in saying that, I mean, if you guys had just done a live performance and put a mic in front of you, or like mic'd it up properly, do you think that would have captured this, like your energy a lot better and like the sound maybe?
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. As far as I'm aware, we never played Raglan's Folly at a pub. So for some reason or another, we got all we got all complicated when we went into the studio. But even when we were playing live, we didn't have a sort of enough of a repertoire of simple rocking sort of stuff. You know, but in the latter days, I noticed looking back now at some of Bon and Bruce's efforts in the latter days were going in that direction. They were getting more like blues rock. Bruce and Bon wrote a song about their being on the dole. I can't remember the name of it. Welfare Boogie, that's it.
Yeah.
Now that's getting close. You know, they were getting closer to the mark. And you know, if the band had persevered with that type of music, they would have done better. You know, our drummer in the early days was Tony Butel. He was a blues fanatic, and at the time I didn't get it. But later on in my 40s here in Hamilton, I realised what it was all about, and I love the blues now, and I still love it, and I listen to all my favourite blues guitarists. Tony, we probably would have done better, I think, with writing songs and as a basis if we had more of Tony's spirit there, and that bands who started out with the blues tended to do better. You know, like the band Free started out as a blues band. The Rolling Stones started out as a blues band. AC/DC had a very blues flavour to them. If I had known then what I know now, I would have encouraged the band to do more of that blues thing. And Mick showed in the Chase, I think it was, he did some beautiful blues playing.
Had you guys have Tony had stayed in the group, and had you guys gone in a more blues direction and Bon had stayed on, do you think you guys would have gone, like, do you think it's at all possible that you guys would have been like a massive, I mean, you guys obviously are very well known in Australia, but do you think you guys would have gone on to be, more successful than what you were at the time? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the blues influence would have kept us more simple. We tended to write complicated songs. And we were listening, in the latter days of Fraternity, we were listening to bands like Yes. I don't know if you're familiar with Yes. They're very complicated, and we did these, we did songs that were very complex, like that one about the guy the Charge of the Light Brigade song, Raglan's Folly. It's not a song of a rock band, it's a rock band trying to be an orchestra, it's all, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and with hindsight, I would say we were far too complicated, and we should have kept it simple.
How could a fraternity have made their trip to England a success? Like, what needed to change that didn't happen? Yeah.
Oh gosh, I don't know. The very first thing we found out was that we didn't have we had a really Mickey Mouse sound system. It was the best we could do at the time, but our first gig was with Status Quo, because we used our PA to open the show for Status Quo, and then they came on with their PA, and it was just a whole different dimension. So we weren't up with the play on PA systems, and putting all the instruments through it and having a good balance and all that. We didn't know all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that was, but I think there was that problem, and then the other problem, which I've already gone into in some detail, was that we just weren't writing simple rocking songs. And at the time we were in London was the time of that. There were two rock bands on Top of the Pops every week. Slade in the 70s, and there was another band that were contemporaries of Slade, and then there was Rory Gallagher, who was very popular in London in 72. And the guys in Fraternity used to rubbish him. Mick and Bruce used to rubbish him because he was playing the blues, for God's sake. We shouldn't have been rubbishing Rory Gallagher. We should have been copying him. We should have been we could have been a good Rory Gallagher kind of band, Mick was a very good guitarist. Bon was a good singer. We could have, if we had learnt from Rory Gallagher instead of rubbishing him, we would have had a much better chance, And listening today, I love Rory Gallagher. I listen to his music quite a lot. So, our heads weren't in the right place, we just didn't know. We weren't awake enough to what was going on and what was good and what wasn't good. I didn't really like Slade all that much, but I didn't really want to be like them, but I would have loved to have been like Rory Gallagher.
But when you guys did get back to Australia, how long were you in Fraternity before you left? Like, was it long after you got back to Australia?
I never went back to Australia with Fraternity. I left Fraternity early in 73, and they carried on and changed the name to Fang. And Sam C left as well, so there was 5 of them doing Fang. I initially, after I left Fraternity, I was hired by Mungo Jerry briefly, but because I wasn't a good enough pianist, that only lasted a month or two. And then I had no gig, and I was in London. I had a wife and a son and a dog to support, and I saw an ad in the paper for cowman. And so I applied and got the job, and we immediately had a nice little cottage. It saved my bacon. But I wasn't a particularly good cowman, but I did the job reasonably well for about 6 months. I got a job at the cigarette lighter company, Ronson's. They had their factory was in Leatherhead in Surrey, which wasn't far from where I was milking cows. And then I noticed the computer guys all drove around in sports cars and looked like rock stars, you know. So I thought, I'll have a go. So I applied to be a computer programmer, and they gave me an aptitude test and an IBM test. And that was the beginning of my computer career. I became a programmer at that job. In the early 70s, computer programmers were in great demand, you know, and there was just tons of work around. So, I earned quite a good living for the next, 15 years.
The tail end of that 15 years, didn't you form a band called Diamond Cutter? Am I right on that?
That was before I got completely out of the computer scene, and I wrote some songs and decided to go back to Australia and have another crack, because I didn't like my chances in England. There was just, in Australia, I had a bit of reputation from fraternity and Bon Scott and all that, so I had more chance of getting something off the ground in Australia. And so I took off back to Sydney, and we hired a rehearsal studio in East Sydney. Several days of the week we were rehearsing there, and they were all original songs, and I wrote about half of them, I suppose. After we rehearsed for about several months, we went into a recording studio that just did a cassette. I think it was for $100. The drummer, John Affleck, he had contacts because he had been a roadie, I think. He knew a lot of people, and he knew some people in the CBS recording studios. Well, I don't know if they were CBS recording studio, but they were connected with the CBS record company. He took our tape to those guys, and they played it, and he played it for them. And they said, "Who's this band?" And he says, "That's our band," you know. And so we got offered a record deal, 7 albums, I think, over 10 years or something like that. The sort of the prospect of becoming a rock star and being, having the manager, one of the executives from CBS coming out and shaking my hands, and he said that I'd written some rock classics, with his words. I wasn't grounded enough to handle all that, you know. I'm an alcoholic, depressed, blah, 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 and I had what they call a psychotic breakdown. And that was me. I spun out of control and ended up in the psychiatric unit in Sydney. I stayed there 2 weeks. And then they flew me back my family flew me back to Hamilton, which is where I've been ever since.
I listened to a lot of your songs on your website, and there's a great blues song that you wrote called Ain't Got the Blues. I think you wrote it in mid-2004 or something like that. It has some great harmonica on it. Yeah, tell me about that song. Yeah, how did that come to be, like the recording process? Yeah.
The lyrics came about just from my experiences in sobriety, if you like, learning how to live life without alcohol. So it's just a basic 12-bar blues sort of song, and they're quite easy to write, and I've written a few of them. I try to write honest lyrics now. Whenever I write a song, I try to write honest lyrics.
What's next for you? Like, yeah, I mean, you've been writing these songs. I mean, you've got your studio. I mean, like, what have you got any musical plans? Any projects you're working on? Like, yeah, what's happening?
Well, I'm 76. I was 76 on Sunday. I think a lot of people at my age feel like that the show is over and it's time to pack it up and go to a rest home. I don't feel that yet. I feel like I've still got some creativity left in me, and I know Bob. I'm pretty sure Bob Dylan is still writing songs, and he's older than me. So I hopefully I haven't written any for a while, but I'm hoping that I'll get back in. I'm getting back into playing my guitar, and I'm hopeful that I'll write some decent sort of songs in the not too distant future.
Look, I just wanted to thank you for making the time today. I think we've spoken about such great things about your time in music.
Well, I hope it's been useful.
That was founding member and organist of Fraternity, John Bisset. To check out John's new music, head to his website at johnbisset.nz. Remember to share this show with other music fans. And if you really enjoyed this edition, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Vinyl Vibes. And to all you music lovers out there, stay groovy.